So today I am joined here by Joshua Noyer, the chairman of the American Blackshirts Party. Can you give us an introduction to what the ABP is and what it represents?
Well, the American Blackshirts Party is something that was formed about 7 years ago. It was formed by myself, and we had another interested individual out in New Jersey. So it was a strange situation with the ABP where we were split so far apart. And that has really come to define a lot of the challenges that we face is that we have a lot of members nationwide, but we're split. I'm out in California, members out in Texas, New York, Florida. And it adds up to a situation where it's hard to present an organization which is really active, even though we are, because we're so geographically dispersed. But beyond that, beyond the actual geographic challenges we face, the ABP is a restatement of the fascism of the 1920s and 1930s of Benito Mussolini, Giovanni Gentili, Alfredo Rocco. Because what we believe in ABP is that the challenges that we face in contemporary society, the social ills that we're confronted with every day, these can only be addressed through a strong state and a rejection of materialism and classical liberal political ideals. And there is no other political ideology slash philosophy which can address these problems quite like fascism does. But the problem that fascism faces in contemporary America is that the problem of perception. I mean, after all, the United States did fight against fascism in World War II. Even though we don't consider Nazi Germany fascist, we did fight against the Italians in North Africa and on the Italian peninsula. So you have that issue there. And plus, you have the fascist boogeyman, which is thrown around basically on a daily basis. It's every politician and pundit's favorite word is to accuse somebody else of being fascist. So we have a unique challenge with the ABP, and that is to present fascism anew to people. So we put on the website, we talk about a lot of the classical writings of Gentili, Alfredo Rocco, Mussolini, and others from not only Italy but from Spain and Mosley's group in Britain, France. Some of these areas where a lot of these thinkers have been basically forgotten for all this time. And then we added on to that, we have our own intellectuals and own thinkers who have the challenge of taking these ideals and putting and fitting them into the American context and putting them into our own words. And so that's the kind of the dual purpose here is that the ABP is here to provide an outlet for expression for people who are sympathetic to fascism and who agree with it, and then to also build the foundations, intellectual and through activism, to actually create an organization which could be a political force. So one day we can assume power in this country, and we can do it honestly because people are going to understand our platform, understand our ideals. It's not going to reflect liberal democracy to the extent that here you have politicians who are deceitful, lie, and they get into power based upon those deceit and lies. We're going to do this very honestly and constructively.
That's very good, and I can really see how it can be a challenge because, obviously with a liberal democracy, it's gonna have a lot of the power in like the economic elite, and you see a lot of people they talk about free speech and whatnot, but um, because our system favors the wealthy and corporations, it's gonna be skewed towards them. So, for example, you can't just put whatever you want on YouTube, right? I'm not sure if
Yeah.
you're familiar with the YouTuber Culture Thug, but he made a lot of like fascist videos, like educating about fascism, and he has had his channel like struck down numerous times to the point where he can no longer like put his messages up on the platform anymore. And that is a big challenge for fascism.
It is a challenge, but you gotta learn to play with the system. I know in Culture Thug's case, um, I think part of that is he brought it on himself by the anti-Semitic videos and all the emphasis he put on the Jewish question. I don't know if specifically that's what took him off. I have a suspicion that it is, but you should be able to present your ideals without going into that. But yeah, I mean, definitely you do have to be careful with what you put out there. I know on our Facebook page, um, we've had a few warnings from Facebook over just plain pictures of Mussolini. So it's not been enough to take us down yet, but we have had strikes and warnings against us on that platform. So even the presentation of a fascist historical figure is going to get you in trouble. But we've been around on these platforms for a long time. I don't think we're going to get taken down, but we just have to. You have to be very careful because the standards that are used against you as a fascist are much more stringent than what other ideologies have to face. I know communists don't have to have this hurdle, socialists don't have to have this hurdle, um, libertarians don't have the same problems, even though to a large extent their beliefs are more extreme than ours. But yeah, definitely, you have to have online access. You have to have social media if you're going to have a successful movement. I mean, that's just given contemporary society. I mean, that's just a given. You have to have access to those channels. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely it's not easy, but you got to learn to work within the system that you're given, and I think to a large extent you can.
Yeah, I would agree. It's just, there's some challenges. I mean, you can even get doxxed, if you have like an unpopular political opinion. It can
Oh,
be pretty
definitely.
scary. Yeah.
Yeah.
So given with that, how has ABP shaped and impacted your life personally?
Um, it's been a process. For one, it's made me look into, and I think to a large extent, be more sympathetic towards opposing views. Because before the ABP, I was a very, I was a paleocon, then a regular conservative before that. So you're talking about somebody who came from, the mainstream political spectrum, and I didn't really have the tolerance that I have now for other ideals. And being part of the ABP, being a fascist, where you're actually looked down and spat upon by a lot of people, has made me realize that as far as ideas are concerned, society is very diverse and society is very differentiated. And it's taught me, well, maybe it's taught me not necessarily to agree with other ideals, but to look into other ideas and understand where they're coming from, because you don't get the benefit of the doubt from other people. And along with that, I mean, fascism has brought me into contact with so many other ideas and philosophers and theorists that if I would have stuck to the path I was on in this kind of paleo conservative movement, I would have never experienced in my own life. Because once you get started on somebody like Thiele, and what's fascinating about him, he is one of the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Best philosophers you can ever come across. He's very readable, and yet at the same time, he deals with complex theories like idealism. Most idealist philosophers you can't really get at first because they're very technical in how they write.
Yeah.
And once I got into Gentili, it led me to Hegel, it led me to Bosanquet, it led me to F.H. Bradley, it led me to Josiah Royce. These kind of figures which are not well known, that I probably would have never even bothered with without fascism. And once you get on that, you get on to others and others and others, and it's a great trip that for the rest of your life you're never going to really stop going down. And because fascism is more than just a political doctrine, it's a philosophy. It deals with all aspects of the human condition, and so it leads you down roads to philosophy, history, science, economics, and that's the beauty of it, is that it covers everything. It's not just politics like the Republicans and Democrats.
It's interesting that you mentioned, about how fascism, a lot of people kind of like spit on the ideology. So, it's very clear in the modern day, fascism has a very big stigma and a negative connotation to it. And what would you like to say to the people who, like, when they hear the word fascism, they are immediately averse to it?
I would encourage them to broaden their minds. I don't expect people to agree with us. I don't expect people to be even friendly with us, but I do expect them to at least give us a fair shot. Read the material. I mean, we have now over 250. We have over 250 articles on the site. We have going on 100 videos on YouTube. We have our podcast channel. So there's plenty of outlets for people to listen to our message and listen to our ideas. And that's all I ask, is because I know there's this perception that fascism is nothing more than some some person wanting to put their boot on somebody else's neck or beat the crap out of their opponents, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Fascism is a belief in the state. It's a belief in national unity and even individual unity, and it happens through the state. And so when we propose laws, strict laws regulating human behavior, something like drugs or marriage or pornography or abortion, we don't do this to persecute an individual group or people. We do this so the whole society at large can become a better society to live in for everybody concerned. Everybody. We're not here to single out any groups. We're not here to persecute. We are here to create national unity, something which has been sorely lacking in this country for a very long time, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And we're getting to the point now where all that you have holding society together is force and the mutual ability to buy a lot of crap, to buy a lot of stuff. And so we need a national ideal to unify us, and that's what fascism is. So I just, before you criticize us, calling us Nazis, wanting to dox somebody or do horrible things to them, just read a little bit of what we have to say. That's all I ask.
Yeah, I think it's very important, before you even like criticize an ideology, that you actually go to the sources firsthand, and to see what they are, espousing before you just dismiss them outright.
Yeah,
And I'm glad you actually. Oh yeah.
I agree with that. I mean, even with my own members, before you go off on communists and Marxists, read Marx a little bit, read some of their works, then you go off on them.
Yeah.
I
At
mean,
least know your enemy.
exactly. I mean, give them the same opportunity that they do not give us. You have to be better than, and that's what I tell my members. That's what I tell people who are sympathetic to us.
Yeah, I think it's like a problem nowadays where, like, even if people like they say they oppose fascism, but it's another problem when they can't even like actually define what fascism is, and they have like this like straw man image of it.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's yeah. They don't want to give you a chance a lot of times. They're very happy in their own bubble, in their own world, where they think they know what fascism is and they're comfortable with it because it's the boogeyman in the closet. It provides them motivation. It provides them an enemy, which otherwise they would not have. I mean, America is very good at that a lot of times, is creating these boogeyman enemies to make up for a lack of national unity and a lack of national ideal.
Yep. And I'm glad that you mentioned, National Socialism, because possibly the biggest reason people are like very reluctant to fascism and the ABP is the idea that fascism and National Socialism are one and the same. And I'd like to ask, what is the ABP's own stance about this?
Well, I mean, we think of them as very different manifestations of a revolutionary ideal, which happened in the late 19th and early 20th century. And a lot of people look at the alliance between Italy and Germany during that time, and they say, well, they're allied, they fought together, so they must be not, if not one and the same, very close to being one and the same thing. Okay, well, let's take that. Okay, let's take that for a moment. I'll play devil's advocate. Let's say that's true. If that is true, let's use that logic. Okay, then the Soviet Union and the United States are one and the same thing then, because they were allied. They both fought against Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. So, and they really have no response to that. But on a more doctrinal level, there's a big difference between fascist Italy, and a lot of different aspects here. For one, fascists believe that the nation and the race, which encompasses the nation, is something that is created by the state. Now let's flip that over to Nazi Germany. They believe that the nation itself, the nation and the race, create the state. Now this may seem a play on words for some people, but there's very influential, there's very problematic doctrinal issues which can come in the future because of this. And let's not ignore the racial issue too. I know that during the late 30s, when Italy and Germany allied, Italy adopted policies similar to Hitler's Germany, but but you can't ignore the 20 years before that and all the literature that came out during that time by Gentili, Mussolini, Rocco, Spirito, and others, which were heavily, heavily critical on the race issue. So you can't really say they're one and the same, because Nazi Germany was based on the racial issue. It was based on the folkish state. And Italy was diametrically opposed to that, because if the state creates the race, then the race is not something that's biological. But if the race creates the nation, if the race creates the state, then biology is central. So you have two very different ideals. And I think if the Axis would have won World War II, we would have seen this play out a lot differently after the war. But you had a very strange international situation during that time, which necessitated, at least in Mussolini's mind, that they had to have an alliance that was similar somewhat, as far as a lot of these ideals go.
Yeah, I know a lot of people, like, they bring up the point with Mussolini and Hitler allying, and they bring up the anti-Semitic laws. But I'm like you said before then, there was a large period of time where they didn't have it. But also from what I've read, in Mussolini's like fascist party, there was a sizable population of Jewish people
Yeah,
in
there
it.
was. Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's not forget what happened during World War II as well. We're all very familiar with the camps in Nazi Germany. Well, fascist Italy, up until the latter part of 1943, when Mussolini was overthrown, refused to send the Jews in their occupied territories to Germany, even though Germany requested that they do so. Italy refused. They refused to hand them over. That really is not something that can be that could be forgotten, because they are the only member of the Axis to do that. Romania, Hungary, Vichy France, all of them sent Jews to Germany when requested. Italy was the only country not to do so, and all of their generals, all of their occupied territories refused to do that, and that can only be laid at the feet of one man, Mussolini. So this is not, yeah. So that alone should tell people these are not one and the same thing. They were very different. They were countries that were allied through necessity and not through ideological affinity.
Are there any other misconceptions of fascism or the ABP's positions that you'd like to address?
Well, we talked about the anti-Semitic issue. We can talk about the racial issue, because that's connected to it a lot. Fascist Italy was very, very critical of a lot of racial theories, some that appeared here in the United States, others that were in Europe. And it was always at the forefront of criticizing segregation based upon races. Now, I know when they conquered Ethiopia, they enacted a similar form of that. But again, that was during the same period as when Nazi Germany was, when they were forming an alliance with Nazi Germany. But again, they based the idea of a race not on biology, not on phenotypes. They based it upon culture, and they based it upon an idea, a common history, a common vision of the future. As I said, a common culture. This is not something based upon biology. So, I mean, that's another aspect that people choose to ignore, because unfortunately you have quite a few people in this country who adopt the fascist label, even though they're more supportive of racial policies of the South during the segregation era, of the Jim Crow era. And it creates a bad perception, which is not based in reality. I don't have it right in front of me, but I could throw up to you plenty of quotes from fascist authors that are very critical of biologically based racial theories. As far as other things, I know one of the greatest misperceptions is on economics. They take the quote, or the supposed quote, from Mussolini that fascism is the merger of the corporation and the individual. I'm not sure if I got that exactly right, but basically that's how it goes. I'm sure you've probably seen it as well. and that creates the perception that, because people really don't know what corporatism is, they don't know what it stood for back then, and they think, well, okay, so fascism supports the merger of the individual and the corporation. So it's a corporatism, a form of government where corporations run and control individuals. So it's similar to what we have now today. And nothing could be further from the truth, because fascist corporatism was an idea based upon the human body. We have arms, legs, hearts, liver. We have all these different aspects of ourselves that have different functions, but they all have one purpose, and they all exist under one individual. And so you cut off an arm or a leg, yeah, you're going to survive, but you're going to be impaired and you're not going to work as well. And the same thing goes for the country. The United States is one country with a lot of diversity, a lot of different people, a lot of different occupations and talents, and all of them have different functions and purposes, but we all exist in one country, basically one body. And so if you cut off any aspect of those individuals, if you take away a certain talent, a certain occupation, the country's still going to go on. The country's going to survive, but it's not going to thrive. It's not going to be what it used to be. And so that's what corporatism is. It's the application of this philosophy of differences working together for one purpose into the economic realm. And so a corporation then was an occupational group. The occupational group consisted of workers, of owners, managers, everybody that exists within that industry, and they all work and they run it together. So you don't have like you have today, where the owners are mandating to the workers, you do this, you do that, you accept this wage cut or that wage cut, this cut in benefits. All of that sort of thing has to be worked out between workers and owners. And considering that whatever your occupation is, you're likely to spend more hours at your job than you are with your family or at your home. So basically your occupation is a second family. And so there's cultural and social events that go on in a corporatist occupation. It takes care of welfare needs. If your family gets sick, you get sick, it'll take care of you. And that's basically what it is. So that the individual not only has his family at home, he has his country, he also has his occupation. Whereas today, whatever your occupation is, there's a good chance that you have an adversarial relationship with you and your job. Whereas under corporatism, you are one with your job and you work together to benefit yourself and your family. And this is a huge misconception amongst most people. They think, well, fascism is capitalism in decay. It was an attempt to save capitalism from its dying essence in the 20s and 30s. And I'm sorry, guys, that's not how it worked. That's not how it was. The whole essence, the core of fascism is unity. And that is shown in its social policies. That is shown in its economic policies, in its philosophy. And that's the essence. That's what corporatism is. And that, if I don't know if that quote is exactly true or not. I mean, there's been some dispute about it. But if it is true, then that's what Mussolini meant. It's not a business per se. It's an occupation based upon the corporatist model.
Yeah, I think there certainly is like a misconception and the racialism aspect. I think what's interesting is I remember reading that Gentili himself, he had like very intense disagreements with Evola with his racial,
Right.
philosophy. So there's definitely like a divide between Italian views on race and German. But another
Well,
misconception. Oh yeah, continue.
yeah, let me just address another kind of segue to that. When a lot of people look at our position on race, they equate us with people on the extreme left, where we want open borders. People can come in any way they want, and that can't be further from the truth. I mean, we believe if you're part of this national community, if you're a citizen in this country, you deserve all its rights and privileges. But that does not mean that we support basically open borders. Now, anybody should come in here that they want. And this kind of, it's a false equivalency. I know a lot of our critics will say that. Just because we don't agree with them on certain aspects of the racial issue does not mean that we support these horrible or immigration trends and we want these to continue. That there's nothing further from the truth. So, I mean, that's another misperception that I want to clear up.
Okay. Also another misconception that I wanted to bring up, um, is that people see, like, when they hear about fascism, they instantly in their mind they relate it to like white supremacy or white nationalism. And it is true that fascism has primarily been in like European nations, Italy, Germany, Romania, but it is also supposed to be a worldview that is organic and universal. So how would you say like other races and ethnicities fit into fascism?
I think it depends on the country. I know the United States is unique to a large extent because we've had people here from other races and cultures and ethnicities for a very long time. I mean, the first black slaves were brought over in the 17th century. They've been here a very long time, and they're just as and their descendants are just as American as you or I. I know my on my father's side, they came from Portugal in the 19th century. So a lot of that history also they were missing out on. And a lot of us I know we have a large Anglo-Saxon um, uh, ancestry in us, but with most of us, it's not all of it. We have Irish, we have Italian, we have a lot of people have German, Spanish. We come from a variety of places and a variety of countries. So the task in the United States is taking this conglomeration of different people and these different groups and you making them into a united whole. And I think that can work. I think that's why we need fascism here. Now when we're talking about other countries, I mean, it's sort of a different story, because you don't have that history. I think you can still have a black immigrant or a Middle Eastern immigrant become part of the community and become a solid citizen. But it's even more imperative for them to stop immigration trends as they are, so they can really develop this unity that I think is starting to plague them. Because the problem with immigration is that for there to be a nation, you need a common history, you need a common culture, you need common ideals, a common vision of the future. And if you have small amounts of immigration, I think that's fine. I think they can assimilate and become an integral part of that, even in Europe, even in Europe. But when you have it in such large amounts as you see here in the United States, Britain, France, you really can never establish those variables which go into creating a nation. So it's a tricky question, but I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I mean, fascism is an organic philosophy, but I think you can have immigrants, non-natives that come into the country. I think they can adapt and become fascists and become part of the country. But if you continue to have large-scale immigration like what you have in the West in the United States, not only will they not assimilate and become fascist, but the people here will not become fascist because their outlook and their idea of the nation will change as well.
So on the topic of different nations, what is the ABP stance on imperialism? Because in World War II or fascist Italy, they were involved with Ethiopia, and a lot of people say that that is evidence of Italy being imperialistic in a negative sense.
Sure, and I don't agree with Mussolini's imperialist policy. I think the invasion of Ethiopia was a mistake. I think the invasion of Greece was a mistake. I don't think that takes away from the other aspects of fascist doctrine or Mussolini's doctrine itself. But I don't think it's consistent with developing your own nation and developing fascism in your own nation. Because, like you said, fascism is an organic philosophy. But the problem is that once you engage in imperialism and start to occupy and take over other countries, it can no longer become an organic philosophy, and you kind of strangle the fascism in its cradle. So that, and plus you have a situation now where warfare is so much more destructive, so much more costly than it was even in World War II, World War One, which it was plenty deadly enough back then. So it doesn't make to me. I know some fascists want to engage in imperialism similar to World War II. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me to engage in that. I think as fascists, we have to be concerned with our own country, developing our own resources, and creating unity within our own people. And then do the same overseas. I've always said that a fascist island in a sea of democracies cannot survive. It cannot thrive. It'll be taken over. So take care of your own country, then help out other fascist movements overseas. You don't have to taking over a country would probably be the worst thing in the world to do, but lead by example, encourage others to do the same. And I think that's the best course of philosophy to go with.
Okay, and to clarify, what would you say is the objective of the ABP? And if you had to pick three issues right now that were most important to the ABP, what would you pick? And for issues, I mean something like environmentalism or income inequality, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so two-part question. Let me answer the first part, the objective of the ABP. I think we have different a hierarchy of objectives. Long term, our objective is to gain political power, but that is very far off. I didn't originally think it would be as far off as it is when I first started the ABP, but the challenges and the hurdles have become more apparent. But long term is to gain political power. Now you have short term objectives before that. I think short term is to gain a presence in all 50 states, gain chapters, gain influence, and have people be active in all 50 states and influencing their community. I think that's reasonable. I think that's doable within the next few years. Then once you reach that point, is to become influential throughout the nation, intellectually, to influence media outlets, influence important thinkers in the country. And then once you do that, you can start you can start contesting elections and start getting people elected to office. So those are, and within that framework as well, let's not forget the importance of self-expression, because as we mentioned earlier, fascism is so looked down upon by people that it's difficult for us sometimes to express ourselves. You have the fear of talking to your neighbors about it, your friends, your coworkers. So you really are kind of stuck sometimes in this little bubbles, talking to individuals that you're already aware and about. So I just want to create a community where people are not afraid to talk amongst themselves, and not a small community, a very large community encompassing a lot of different people. Because when we express ourselves through our writings, our speeches, even talking with others, we grow in the philosophy. It becomes something special, and it kind of takes on a life of its own. Now, as far as you mentioned the top three objectives.
Yeah, it's like if the ABP had to have like three issues that they were most concerned about. Yeah.
Okay. I think number one, going off the top of my head, would have to be the corporatism. Because like we mentioned earlier, people have this view of corporatism as being government run by corporations and businesses, imposing their will upon the populace at the expense of individuals like you and me, and basically impoverishing the country so they can get rich. And when you reference corporatism, I want people to understand that that's not what it stands for. That's not what corporatism means. Corporatism is unifying. Corporatism is bringing people together. It's for a prosperous country, both spiritually and economically. Let's talk about 2 and 3. 2, I think it's a broad-based, I think it's social issues to a large extent, not any one specific issues, because Pat Buchanan in 1992 got on the stage, the Republican National Convention, and talked about a culture war. I'm going to argue with you that culture war is done. That culture war is lost. That doesn't mean I don't think people should stop fighting. I don't think it means that people should stop talking about these issues, but there has to be a new way to reference them. There has to be a new way to talk about these issues. So we have to start over on this, because what's happening now, I see, especially amongst a lot of alt-right groups, is they're continuing to fight on these issues, but they're sounding more and more like Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, even to a certain extent the Westboro Baptist Church. And that doesn't work. Because I noticed one thing during the debate on the whole culture war was that the traditional side always seemed to lose. They couldn't reference their arguments very well. They couldn't put them in context. And they always ended with some kind of moral absolute, like they would take something out of the Bible, or they would just end with tradition good, gay marriage bad. And that, when you have people relying on those type of arguments, then you know that they have failed. And that became apparent throughout the debate when more and more young people were starting to be more sympathetic towards homosexual unions, um, and all the transsexuals and all of the different various aspects of the culture war. So that culture war in that kind of terms is done. We lost. And so we have to start over and we have to rethink it. We have to start referencing these issues differently. And I think within the ABP, we've come a long way towards creating a context by which people can start doing this. And that would be, I think, be my number two goal, is for on the broad-based right, for people to start engaging on these issues differently. So maybe not in the near future, but sometime in the distant future, we can start winning again and we can start turning things around on this issue. And I think number three, it's to get people talking and thinking differently about politics. We have this conception of politics in this country, sort of like the state, that it's a necessary evil. It's something imposed upon people to protect property and contract, something dirty but necessary. And I don't think it's that at all. I think politics and the state in general are noble institutions, noble ideals that, if you look back in philosophy and history, they have a purpose, they have a function. It's very different from the conception today. And so I want people to think about these things differently. I want them to read philosophy, go back to classical literature, Plato, Aristotle, start studying Hegel. So we can start framing this debate differently regarding politics and the state, and get out of this Republican versus Democrat dichotomy that we're faced with now, which has become so incredibly destructive.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, even within like the liberal democratic framework, like even if you are liberal, like you cannot vote outside of those two parties. You know, like if you vote for a
No.
third party, you're wasting your vote. You know, the liberal would just say you're wasting your vote. You have to vote for one of these parties.
Yeah, they suck you into it. I have people, members a lot of times ask me, why do we put some of this stuff on the website we do? Some of this more technical, hard to understand literature that we have on there, a lot of the idealist stuff. And I tell them that's the root, that's the foundation. You understand that, you can make effective change, because you're going to see that what's offered, what's in front of you by the news media, what the Republicans tell you, what the Democrats tell you, you don't have to accept that. There is an alternative. There is something different, but you just have to think outside of the box and not giving it face value what you're told, because there is another reality other than what you're shown, but you got to put some work into it. You have to study, you have to read, and you have to apply yourself. And that's what I hope people can get out of that. Because if we keep going down this road we're going now, the future for our children and our grandchildren is going to be a very ugly, dreary place.
Yeah, and also going back to what you're saying about culture, it's I would definitely say like the culture right now is it's gonna be very hard for fascism, but also um, since culture is usually a big part of social matters, it kind of indicates what a society deems as okay, and you notice that even more quote unquote radical political ideologies, um, let's say like socialism. A lot of people are talking about socialism right now, but they're gonna be more accepting of socialism because it doesn't have like socially traditionalist or socially conservative views. You know,
Right.
and another um, issue I would say in modern society that kind of links in with that. As in recent years, like I said, people are talking about like socialism a lot, and there's like a rising skepticism to capitalism, like especially
Mhm.
amongst the youth. I think a Gallup poll, they did a poll, and amongst the American youth, only like less than half of them have a positive view on capitalism. Um, and there are, other political ideologies such as socialism and Marxist communism that seek to offer an answer to, the problems of capitalism. What makes the ABP's platform different from these other choices? And what would you say, for a person on that intersection to choose the ABP over those choices?
I would say that Marxism and socialism, while they address some of the issues that are wrong with capitalism, they're very similar to capitalism, because the foundation of both socialism and Marxism is materialist. It's about money with them. It's about accumulating resources. It's about taking control. And they apply a very adversarial um, the adversarial viewpoint to society. They have rich against poor, this group against that group, and it's not a whole different from what you see now. Whereas what we offer in the ABP is something based upon unity, and that's why I think if we're able to get our message out, especially when it regards to corporatism, I think our potential is limitless. I think we can go really far with this because our view, our ideology, our philosophy is based upon unity. It's based upon bringing people together. And I think, especially with a lot of these young people, that's what they want. That's the direction they want to go, but they don't have an outlet for that. They see the Republicans and the Democrats, and then the only alternative they see is with the red flag. They see the Democratic Socialists of America, they see the Communist Party, they see all these Marxist groups, and they think, well, that's the only alternative. So I might as well go for that. And in reality, if that was the only alternative, it's probably better than the R and the D that they see now. But the problem is that they don't see the American Blackshirts Party. They don't see our message, and when they do, they have this kind of programmed response of hostility and anger towards us because these groups that they align with, these socialist groups, always are using the F word this, F word that, fascist bad, fascist racist, fascist will want to kill you, and so it's really they've been brainwashed into believing this. So when they on those few times when they have come across our message, a lot of times it's accompanied by anger and hostility because they're programmed to think like that. But if we could break through that programming, if we can get our message through, I think we can go real far because we are providing what people really want. They want to live in a community. They want to be part of something special. And we provide that. Fascism provides that. So that's why I'm very optimistic. I mean, the ABP has been a very long time in the process, a very slow growing organization, but I think it's worth it because I think in the future, I mean, we know no limits, we know no boundaries. I think this is going to go really far, and that's why I'm sticking with it. A lot of the leadership and a lot of the members have been with us for the last 6-7 years. We have a lot of longtime guys in there who believe in what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's just like what the Greek Stoics would say, the bigger the challenge, the more you're gonna grow from it, and the hardship is, part of the journey. And I would also say, in the topic of, you know, how people have this wrong image of fascism, it's because they kind of equate any type of like social conservatism with like this vague right wing authoritarianism, and they also equate fascism with like some vague right wing authoritarianism. That gives them that image why they're so hostile whenever they hear
Yeah.
anything about ABP. And on since we're also on the topic of ABP fascism contrasting with communism, is very common. You mentioned it earlier, actually. The communist critique of fascism, that it's really just like a stage of capitalism. It protects capitalism and the bourgeoisie, and it's an interesting critique because fascism also opposes capitalism. So it's
Right.
ultimately a critique of corporatism. And so, for example, they'll argue that fascist Italy's corporatism only benefited the capitalists. So what do you have to say like in response to that communist criticism?
Well, I would argue that during the Great Depression, Italy had an unemployment rate no greater than 6%. So they were providing work. They expanded social welfare programs. Um, Wages didn't exactly rise during the Great Depression, but the government had the ability and it had the power to lower rents, to lower prices. So if you look at the stats coming from Italy during this time period, they fared pretty well compared to other countries. The one country that did do relatively well during the Great Depression was France, but compared to the United Kingdom and the United States, um, Italy did fairly well. Now they didn't do as well as Germany or the Soviet Union. Those two countries were more industrialized and had a bigger natural resource base. Italy had basically no natural resources, and they were completely reliant on imports for a lot of things. And so, given taking all of that into consideration, I think they did well, and I think they provided a better living standards for their people. Health and nutritional stats all were a lot better during the fascist Italy era. Um, and again, I think even Mussolini admitted it himself. They were probably they were probably too sympathetic to the interest of business. So I think they could have done a lot more during this time span, but I don't think that takes away from what they actually did in improving living standards and living quality for the people there. Unlike the Soviet Union, where millions were butchered and killed or forced into labor camps and forced into doing industrialization, where I think the alternative of Italy was a lot better than it was in Russia at this time.
Yeah. Um, what is the ABP's view on violence in a political context? For example, communists. Mao Zedong had that famous quote about power comes out of a barrel of a gun. But for fascists, a lot of them take inspiration from like George Sorel, who saw violence as good and necessary, which a lot of critics use to characterize fascism as like warmongering. What do you have
I,
to say about that?
I think it depends on the circumstances. In late 1919, 1920, Italy was going through a period of basically civil war, and so you have to assert yourself, and you have to be strong, and you're going to have to commit acts of violence against your opponents in a situation like that. So I think violence in that case was warranted. I think it was justified. Um, but that doesn't mean it's warranted and justified universally in all cases, in all circumstances. Here in the United States today, I think it would be asinine. I think it would be foolhardy to engage in acts of violence to um, to promote political purposes. You'd be in jail within days, and your whole movement would be crushed and destroyed. So violence today, and it's not even the issue, because let's bring out a theoretical case where you were going to commit acts of violence against your political opponents, and you were going to take power through some kind of violent coup. Okay, let's say that happened today. Again, that would fail miserably, because you have a population here in the United States which doesn't agree with fascist doctrine, which has a bad view of fascists, and they would go back and overthrow this fascist government again within days. So the number one goal of any fascist should be, let's educate people. Let's talk to them about what we believe and why we believe it. And I think that's the most effective thing. And once we start doing that, again, I think we will achieve political power. I think we will do well in elections, and it's just a matter of time. But any acts of violence and none of it, I mean, all of that goes up in smoke. It's done. So again, in the case of contemporary America, that's a no go. You can't do that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I know that like online, especially in like right wing circles, there's a lot of debate, to use violence or not, and especially in the wake of a lot of these, shootings, and the shooters attribute it to fascism, or they claim that they're fascist or some right wing ideology. Um, but you can see it's not very effective because there's an immediate backlash. There's media coverage of it, so people are going to see that, and they're going to have an even worse, connotation when it comes to fascism or whatever ideology that you proclaim. You're doing the shooting in name of. So I think it's just very unproductive, and really at the end of the day, it just kind of hurts your cause.
Yeah, it just, I mean, that's one of the toxic aspects of social media, is that people can say things that they would never say to somebody face to face, and they can pretend like they're the big man, and that they're brave and strong. When in actuality, the people that do that online are nothing but cowards. I mean, it is what it is, um, and it's very detrimental to the cause, and it makes everybody look bad when they talk like that.
Yeah, and I would say on a topic of modern society, obviously society has changed drastically from when fascism first arose. So moving forward in the future, what do you think sets the ABP apart from, like, say, the past fascist movements?
Um, are we talking about? fascist Italy, interwar fascism, or what came after that?
Just like even internationally, like let's say Iron Guard or the Phalange, just the different fascist movements from the past. Um,
Well, I
because
think
like American fascism for ABP, like how is it going to be different?
well, the fascism for America is something unique, and to the extent that we've never really had a homegrown fascist movement in this country. And so we're not working off a previous model. I know you may reference Romania, even in Italy, Germany, Spain. You had very powerful fascist groups there in the past. You have a model, you have a template from which to work from. Here in the United States, we don't have that really. I think the ABP is unique to the extent that we're the first real fascist organization in this country, and that provides us really unique challenges and opportunities. A lot of it is how do we put in context what we believe? How do we present this to the masses? Because you have social media, you have the internet, something which didn't present itself in the 20s and 30s. And so how we can exploit this new technology, and it's going to change too. With social media today, internet, it's not going to be the same 20 years from now, 30 years from now. So we have to keep evolving and changing along with the times and present our message afresh and anew. And that's the biggest challenge we're going to face. And that's what's going to differentiate us the most from our predecessors in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Yeah, I think it's a mistake to not try to adapt to the modern times because, like you said, fascism is supposed to be organic. And if your society is more technologically advanced and is different from societies of the past, then you should adapt to that. Like the people in some right wing circles, they kind of LARP, they kind of like reject technology or they say like go to the past.
Yeah.
But or they buy those costumes like trying to reenact the war. They're very LARPy, but I think that's missing the point. When you just trying to hark to the past constantly, especially with fascism because it's supposed to be so organic.
Yeah, it has to develop at the time. We have new technologies, new occupations coming up, and so even thing like corporatism, you have to constantly adjust and you have to reframe it so you can encompass more and more different talents and diversities, occupations. And again, you have what are we going to do with automation? As we become more technological, some industries are not going to require as much labor. So, what do we do as far as taxation purposes? Because we're going to need to tax businesses to get that revenue and retrain people for other occupations or other skills. And so, it presents a lot of new issues that I don't think our predecessors would have ever thought about. And so that's what we have to do. That's what we have to concentrate on. And the whole uniform thing, like you referenced, is it really is a throwback from that era. And I don't think it has much of a place here in contemporary America.
Yeah, I also think it usually just scares off a lot of people because they kind
Mhm.
of see it as intimidating or they associate it with some past regime that they may not have agreed with. So I definitely think with a new country, if it's supposed to adapt nation to nation, you should kind of make your own identity instead of getting some random uniform from a country that you weren't even from,
Right.
and role playing as I think it's just kind of silly.
It is. It is. It is. It doesn't have any place in any contemporary fascism. If you use that sort of thing, you're going to fail.
Yeah, without a doubt. And so for the final question, for people who are interested in the ABP, what resources would you recommend that they consult?
Well, obviously, our website, that is the number one resource. Again, I reference we have over 250 articles on there, a lot of them by myself, BK Burton, a lot of other members, and a lot of historical material that's going to give you a good foundation and a very good basis to start. I don't want you to just listen to this interview for those of you that are listening and say, hey, I want to sign up. I want to do it now. I mean, again, I'm not going to reject any membership from anybody who does it that way, but I encourage you, know what you're getting into, educate yourself, create a good foundation, and then you're going to thrive as a member. The website has all kinds of good resources. We have a frequently asked questions. We have we have a recommended reading, recommended websites, you name it. The ABP is going to come out with our first published book sometime within the next couple of weeks. It's from one of our writers, Jeremy Horn, an academic, and it's called We the State. It's going to be a book based upon the state, its history, its process, how it's developed throughout time, and what is the future of the state. And so, again, watch out for this within the next couple of weeks. It'll be on the website, so you can purchase it there. And just check out what we stand for. Check out our sources. We have a good YouTube channel, podcast channel. All of that is available to you, and it's constantly updated. It constantly has new material on there. And I hope after familiarizing yourself with our ideas and views, you will go onto that membership page and sign up to be a member.
Okay, well, thank you for your time, Joshua Noyer. It was a pleasure. Are there any other places that one can reach the ABP from, like any other handles or platforms?
Oh yeah. We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter page. Yeah. Again, if you message either of those, your message should be answered within a few hours. Contact at American Blackshirts is our main email address. Again, it's on the website, so you should be able to contact through there. YouTube, you can any kind of comments on there will be answered. So yeah, there's a variety of resources to use. We're always willing to talk and answer any questions that people may have.
Okay, well, again, thank you for your time, Mr. Noyer.
All right, thank you very much for having me.